I know a lot of people were thinking, oh, I want to go cover Ukraine, I want to cover combat, which is a vastly more expensive and dangerous story to cover, because you have to have all your equipment, safety training, you have to hire people to help you on the ground when you're working in these zones. But with climate change, you don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, if your region is experiencing drought or heavy brush fire seasons, inordinate amounts of rain and flooding, these are events you can kind of go and cover. And what I would tell students is to look beyond the immediate effect like that. So you go, for example, let's say you're in California, you go cover yet another brutal fire season, which now is 10 months long, 9 months long. You go cover another fire season, but don't stop when the flames stop. What about the communities in the aftermath? Who's leaving? Who's staying? Who's finally given up after enduring 20 years of fires and they've had it and they're moving to a different region? Where are they moving to? Where is this migration happening? Because climate migration is very real. So for students out there, there are so many ways to tell the stories. And I think that there is demand for these stories. I think these are stories that you could find a place to sell them, to buy the photographs, to write something up with the photographs. I just think it's important and available. It's accessible. You don't want to try to do stories where the access is really difficult. For example, I remember I was speaking with a student. They were talking about really wanting to do human trafficking stories. I mean, that is a supreme challenge, even with all the resources of a place like the New York Times or the Post or Nat Geo or whomever. That's a very daunting proposition. Access is nearly impossible. Faces can't be shown. You have to have a certain skill to really get the power of that story across without exploiting the very people whom you are already being exploited. So, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew or what you can access. But I think stories like climate change are much more accessible. Researching stories like this has become so much easier than in the past, right? I mean, we have our devices on your phone. You can research any topic. You can just speak into your phone and, wads of information will just come up on that topic. So it's important to do your research. And first you have to have the reason why you want to do it, right? You don't want to just go, for example, someone says, oh, I really want to cover conflict photography. Well, why do you want to cover conflict photography? Are you doing it because it's, some kind of romantic notion of being a foreign correspondent covering a war zone? Do you have some kind of tie to the region you're going to? Have a real reason that you want to do this stuff. Do you want to document war crimes? What is it? What is your purpose to be in that theater of operations to photograph these things? For climate change, for me, it's a love of the environment, a love of the ocean. It's passion that drives me to go do it. And then you research places and you just naturally want to dive in more, right? Because it's something you're passionate about. But it is crucial to do all your research before going somewhere so that you can hit the ground running. You know what you're doing. You're not just aimlessly wandering around taking pictures that maybe don't mean anything to the story or missing the actual story, missing some crucial sources that could lead you to really kind of expose what's happening in that particular place. Is there a culprit in the story? Is there a particular company that might be fouling the water? Something like Flint, Michigan, or in the Caribbean. I mean, there are these hooks to stories that will put them kind of over the top in the eyes of an editor if you're trying to sell it. But yeah, and research is what gets you those stories, right? You need to find out what's going on, and doing the research. Don't just rely on Google, even Reddit, but look at a lot of the local publications, what they're doing. What are people talking about there? Maybe there's some kind of medical statistics. If there's some ailments that suddenly became more common. I mean, there's ways to kind of dig deep and find out whether there's a good hook to the story. As far as talking to people when you're in these places, I know for a lot of young photographers and frankly, not so young photographers, that barrier is a really hard thing to get through, right? It's you're not only a stranger, but you're a stranger with a camera. And, the camera is a very intimidating device for many, many people, especially now that everyone kind of knows the power of that camera and that these images could be beamed worldwide in an instant. But for me, it's just talking to people. I always, for example, when I was covering Hurricane Ian in the Fort Myers area. We would just walk into some of the communities there that were really devastated. And it is difficult because many of these people have lost everything. They've just been through a very traumatic experience. There's other media that are there, and it's kind of hard to not feel a bit like a vulture, but these are important stories. But at the end of the day, almost everybody I met when I was there wanted their story told. They wanted to talk about what happened. They had just survived something very intense, and for a lot of them, I think it was very soothing to be able to talk to someone else about it. A lot of them wanted to talk about how the community came together, how their neighbors helped them out, and that's when you find all these stories. But when I heard about this elderly couple, and I know a couple other journalists had already been in this community, but I ended up spending a long evening with this elderly couple that survived by staying in their place, and they were floating about, and they were very welcoming and allowed me to come into their home. But you just got to be honest, straightforward, and have a reason to be there, that you're not just, I'm just going around taking pictures, but you're there for a purpose. I never hide my camera and then bring that out later and saying, oh, by the way, can I take some pictures? I always have the camera out front and center so they immediately know who I am and what I'm doing. Because if you try to BS them, if you try to, kind of pull one over on them, people know, they know right away. And so that's kind of the way that I have always worked. And oftentimes it's not always that welcoming. I can't tell you how many times I've been thrown out of places and yelled at and worse, physically assaulted and things like that. It does happen, but it's rare. More often than not, people have stories to tell. They want to tell their stories, and at the end of the day, that's what we are. We're storytellers.